Silent Ponyville3, Chapter 3, Part 2. Is it safe? Spike asked cautiously, peeking his head around the corner. Twilight looked over at the baby dragon, seeing his eyes filled with fear. Yeah, Twilight spoke softly, looking down at her medallion. The buzzing had come to a stop. It is safe now. Twilight vanished the sword back into her magic as the body of the creature slumped to the ground. She stared at it solemnly as the baby dragon slowly walked over to her. The scene truly was sinking in. She had killed yet another living creature, and this time she'd done it on purpose. But this was also different. As she felt the young dragon wrap its arm around her front leg, she was reminded of why she had done it. Right now, she had to protect Spike. She was the adult here. She had to be the one there to comfort him. She had to remember she wasn't a little filly anymore. Once all this was over, she could mourn over the lives she cut short. But until then, she had to focus. Her only focus had to be the safety of Spike and returning Ponyville back to the way it had been. Twilight carefully lifted Spike up onto her back and finally walked past the creature. Rounding the corner of the bookshelf, her light fell upon the back of the reference section. She could see a broken down door that would have led to another one of the study rooms in the back. She walked over to it and pressed her hoof against the door, finding the door broken and lodged into place. There would be no getting into the room. With a soft sigh, she turned her head to the left and saw the second floor door from the back, though this door looking still to be intact. The third door appeared to be buried behind a pile of discarded books and desks. Twilight approached the middle door carefully and placed her hoof against it. Her medallion wasn't buzzing yet, which put some confidence in her hooves. She pushed the door open, not certain of what she'd see next. The study room was surprisingly well lit, a lantern hanging from the center of the room. Unlike the rest of the library, the room didn't appear to be falling apart. The walls were painted with a simple cream coat with a simple wooden pattern on the bottom. A table sat in the middle of the room, set up for any pony to come in and start studying. On the table were only two items that sat right next to each other, a few sheets of paper and what looked like a large jigsaw puzzle piece. "What is that?" Spike asked, looking at the large puzzle piece that lay on the table. It had several lines on it, some seeming to be a part of a bigger picture. Twilight couldn't quite decipher what was on the puzzle piece. It looked like it might have been a picture of a mural. Twilight hummed softly, looking at the puzzle piece, before pulling out the sheet from the lobby desk and reading part of it out loud. "I lost them. I can't believe I lost them. Those things are going to guard them now. I know it. Why did it have to be a puzzle?" She looked from the note down to the puzzle piece before making the paper disappear. "Spike, I think this is what the note was talking about. Pieces of a puzzle that, when gathered together, will unlock the door to the back room." Twilight levitated the puzzle piece up before placing it in her magic. "I guess that makes sense. How many pieces do you think there are?" Spike asked out aloud. "And are they going to be guarded by one of those things?" A shiver rolled down his spine. "I don't know. It's a pretty big piece, so I would assume that there would not be many of them," Twilight pondered. "And they might each be guarded." She put a hoof to her chin in thought, thinking about their current predicament. If only there was a way to know where the other pieces would be. "How about a locator spell?" Spike suggested quickly. "A locator spell?" Twilight blinked before a light bulb seemed to be going off in her head. "Spike, you're a genius!" She smiled, and she pulled out the map and the puzzle piece. "Well, you know I try," Spike chuckled, accepting the compliment with his unusual graciousness. Twilight flattened the map out onto the table and floated the puzzle piece above it. "Alright, this puzzle is a part of a whole. I should be able to use the spell to locate the missing pieces of it and show us where they're located." Twilight concentrated her magic on the piece. The piece began to glow brightly as invisible strings of ether shot out into the library, connecting the separate pieces of the puzzle. The piece then shot down 3 separate beams of light down into the map, marking the separate locations on which the pieces were located. Once the spell was complete, she vanished the piece back in her magic and looked over the map, observing their locations. Alright, it seems there's only 3 more pieces to the puzzle. Twilight scanned carefully, checking each of the locations that they had been marked. 2 appear to be in the main section of the library, and the 3rd is in another study room. If we can head straight for them, we'll get into the back room quickly. Twilight smiled, placing her hoof against the back room section of the map. I don't know, Twilight. It looks like that main section of the library became a maze, just like the reference section did. Spike looked over the map a little worried. Well, perhaps, but I guess we'll find out, Twilight said, putting the map away once more. Her eyes fell upon the papers that lay on the table next, reading a large title that read, The Cat Who Married a Mouse. She blinked confused before beginning to read a little out of curiosity. Once upon a time, there was a cat who made acquaintances with a mouse. They knew each other so well that they grew to be friends and gained love. So they decided to wed. They married a couple with their lives in peace. One day in the summer, they realized their need to store food for the winter. Together, they found a beautiful piece of meat covered in fat and sealed in a jar. To keep it safe, they hid the jar in an abandoned field so that others could not find it. However, the cat began to long for the meat and dreamt up a lie to tell the mouse. When the mouse believed the lie, he went to the meat and ate a small portion, returning to the mouse with his appetite satisfied and a belly full. However, the cat soon began to long for the meat once more, so he jumped up another lie to the mouse. The mouse began being trustworthy, believing the cat, and the cat went back to the jar and feasted once more upon the stored meat. Even after 2 feasts upon the meat, the day came when the cat was still not satisfied with his prior feasts, and once more he dreamt up a lie to the mouse. The mouse grew suspicious of the cat, but let him leave once more. The cat returned to the meat and ate the rest of the spoils, leaving none in the jar. When the cat returned, the mouse questioned the cat. The cat tried to lie, but the mouse caught wise. As the mouse began to accuse the cat of eating their food, the cat grew tired of the questions, so the cat snapped the mouse up and fell swoop and swallowed the mouse whole, filling the cat's belly once more. Twilight looked at the story with a confused awe. The moral seemed confusing. The message seemed unclear, though the story had a beginning, middle, and end. She could not tell for what purpose the story was written or the relevance it had to being near the puzzle piece. Deciding not to ponder on it for much longer at the moment, she surrounded the paper and combined it with her other papers that were stored inside of her magic. Alright, let's find the other puzzle pieces, Spike, Twilight said, confirming their plan of action. Spike nodded in agreement and they quickly left the study room. They wandered back through the small maze made from the reference section, Twilight eyeing the body of the creature once more as she passed it before quickly returning to the main hallway. Alright, according to the map, the next piece is actually fairly close. There's about 12 bookshelves in the main room, and it should be in the walkway between the rows 3 and 4. Twilight spoke optimistically as she walked into the main room of the library. She could see the bookshelves coming into view now. She scanned her light across the shelves, seeing them in the same state of disrepair as the ones in the references section. Dust was covering several of the books, and she could see grime starting to climb up the sides of the bookshelf. She moved the light to look down the center aisle of all the bookshelves, hoping to spot the puzzle piece between the second and third shelves. Instead, her pendant fell upon a pile of books that was blocking her path. She let out a soft sigh, scanning her light upwards. The pile of books seemed unnaturally neat and stopped at the top of the bookshelf. Of course! This area is going to be a maze too, Twilight sighed softly. She turned to the left and walked down the aisle of shelves 1 and 2, trying to find a way around the puzzle piece. Around to the puzzle piece. How many more monsters do you think that are in here? Spike asked nervously, trying to keep an eye on the darkness around them, though it was difficult to see anything not illuminated by the pendant. I don't know, Spike. I'm trying to think about it right now. trying not to think about it right now, Twilight said, trying to shake the thought from her mind. At the end of the row, she could see the line of study rooms that lined the walls just beyond the bookshelves. To her left, she could see the public bathrooms, and to the right were more shelves and study rooms. Each of the doors to the study rooms seemed to have fallen to the disrepair as the first study room door she had seen. Well, Twilight began to think, pulling out the map once more, I assume we'll be able to reach each piece, but the library has been turned into a maze against us. So all we have to do is figure out which sections are blocked, which ones aren't, and find our way around. She viewed the map carefully before sighing. I wish I had just grabbed some quills and ink before we left. Here you go, Spike said, suddenly producing a red quill and a small bottle of ink. I figured you'd want them eventually. Wow, I suppose you are my #1 assistant for a reason. Twilight smiled, grabbing the items in her magic and dipping the quill into the ink. She then began to mark the map with where she had seen the pile of books. With that in mind, she began to walk towards the back of the library, following along the wall. She marked off a pile of books that blocked her way between shelves 2 and 3, but saw that the path through shelves 3 and 4 was open. Hoping she'd get closer to the puzzle piece, she began to walk down it, though she didn't get far before she saw that the end was also blocked by a pile of books. She softly sighed and marked it off the map. Then, as she was turning to head back, she saw a particular noticeable red book sticking out from the shelves. Curious, she levitated the book off the shelf. The cover read, The Old Widow. Twilight opened the book up and read what was inside. In a certain large town there once lived a poor widow who sat every evening thinking of everyone she had lost. Her husband, her son, all of her relations and friends, so that she was quite alone in the world. Her heart grew sorrowful with her thoughts, but loss of her son troubled her the most, and she wept very bitterly. One day she sat quite still, lost in her thoughts, when she began to hear bells ringing from the town hall. She wondered how she had spent all of the night sorrowing, but lighting her lantern, she went to the hall. As she entered, she saw it already lit up, but no one with the usual tapers, but glimmeringly light shone through the whole building. It was already filled with ponies who stood seemingly to await their deeds for the day. When the widow walked to her normal spot, she found that it was already filled. As she looked round at the ponies, she perceived that there were her deceased relations, who sat there in their old everyday dresses, but with pale countenances. They never spoke nor sung, but a gentle whisper and hum floated through the wall. Presently an aunt of poor widow got up and said to her, Look towards the steps, and you will see your son. She looked and saw her son hanging from the gallows. See, continued the aunt, thus would happen to your son had life been given to him. Instead, they were mercifully taken when they were but innocent. With trembling steps, the old widow went home and thanks the heavens for their mercy. Then on the third day after she lay down on her bed and died. What's that, Twilight? Spike asked just as Twilight finished reading the story. I'm not sure, Spike. Twilight furrowed her brow in confusion, closing the little red book. It was sticking out of the bookshelf, and unlike the rest of the books here, it was practically immaculate. Immaculate what? Spike asked, confused. It's pristine, undamaged. It hasn't fallen to disrepair like the other books have, Twilight sighed, vanishing the book into her magic. Oh well, why didn't you say so? Spike asked, confused, causing Twilight to softly roll her eyes before exiting the aisle. She continued along the wall slowly, marking off the blocked path between rows shelves 4 and 5 before coming to a stop between 5 and 6. The medallion had started to buzz once more. Twilight glanced the light slowly down the aisle between 5 and 6. The aisle was empty, but the medallion continued to buzz. Spike grew silent as the unicorn began to slowly step through the aisle. She quickly put the map away and pulled out the sword from her magic, holding it ready for anything that might happen. She stopped as the sound of munching suddenly hit her ears. She quickly looked around at the source, hearing it nearby. Then she stopped as she realized where it was. "Spike, it's behind the bookcase," Twilight whispered, looking to the shelf to her left. A spiked tentacle suddenly broke through the shelves, causing Twilight to jump back and raise her sword over her head. The spike wriggled just a foot away from her, having nearly impaled one of them. It seemed to be searching around for something before coming back to settle against the books. The spike stabbed straight through the cover of one of the nearby books before dragging it through to the creature. The sound of munching rang out aloud as the creature seemed to engulf another book into its mandibles. Twilight nervously raised her hoof to her lips, turning to look at Spike and giving the quietest shh she possibly could. Twilight then aimed the sword to face the bookshelf. In the case, the tentacle returned and began to slowly tip hoof across the aisle as quietly as she could. She froze for a moment when the creature seemed to give a grunt and stop eating. She didn't move again until she heard it going back to munching away at its find. Twilight soon reached the end of the aisle, the buzzing of the medallion finally growing quiet. Together, her and Spike let out a collective sigh of relief. "That was close," Spike said, wiping off the sweat off of his forehead. "Yeah," Twilight agreed, putting the sword away and pulling the map back out. "But there should be another puzzle piece right over there." Twilight pointed just past the 6th bookshelf to the wall. Spike looked in the direction she was pointing, seeing the familiar-looking puzzle piece sticking out between 2 books on a bookshelf. Twilight quickly covered the piece with her magic and carefully pulling it out of the shelf. Twilight then looked to the left of the bookshelf and spotted a door that led to the back room. On the door was a square space that looked like it was slotted to fit 4 separate pieces of the puzzle. "See? I told you that the puzzle pieces opened the door," Twilight smiled as she summoned the second piece from her magic. She lined the corners of the pieces to where they would fit appropriately in the slot. The pieces fit into place with a click, each forming a half of the picture. "So we just need to get those other 2 pieces and the door will unlock," Spike said, smiling. "It'd be nice if getting the pieces was easier," Twilight sighed softly, turning around. She began to walk down the center aisle of all the bookshelves when she stopped, hearing the medallion start buzzing again. "Oh no, not another one," Twilight softly cursed under her breath and drawing the sword once more. She looked around herself. The door was behind her and 2 empty aisles to her sides. She snapped her head back to the center aisle and saw the creature begin to walk slowly into her field of vision. The 2 tentacles on its back were slowly moving back and forth as if scanning the air around it. The creature's seemingly skinned head was wobbling slowly back and forth as if trying to taste or feel things around it. The 2 halves of skin that used to be a head flapped to its sides as it walked. Twilight looked around once more in a panic. The creature was going to be upon her quickly, and Spike was still on her back. She could feel the young dragon gripping onto her tightly once more. She couldn't stand there and fight, not with Spike possibly being put in danger. She had to find a safe spot for him if she was going to fight again. She turned to her left and quickly ran down the aisle. At the wall, she looked around, trying to find a study room with a working door. The first door was a mangled mess of splintered wood boarded up to prevent entry. The second, however, had a door that looked perfect. Running quickly to the door, she pressed her hooves against it and it flung open. The room was brightly lit like the last study room she'd entered, consisting of a simple table once more. She quickly moved inside and shut the door behind her, the loud buzzing of her medallion turning into a very soft hiss, but never quite going silent. "Okay, I think we're safe in here for a moment," Twilight commented quietly, backing away from the door. "We'll just wait a moment or 2 and see if the creature passes." It seemed like a logical idea in her mind. After all, it didn't seem to be in any hurry, and if she could avoid fighting it when possible, she preferred to. Even then, she could feel the worry building inside of herself that she would become too accustomed to killing living creatures. "Hey, Twilight! Look there on the table," Spike said, suddenly pointing to something that lay on the table. Twilight looking towards it. "Isn't that like one of the boxes we found in the library?" "It is, Spike," Twilight said, surprised. There was a small mahogany box lying on top of the table. Twilight covered it with her magic and levitated it over to herself. If it's here, then that must mean that there is something inside of it. She gripped the top half of the box with her magic, expecting the box to be locked, and she'd have to go and find some minuscule key hidden inside of a box halfway across the library. However, the box opened easily. In the next instant, something shot out of the box quickly, rising straight up and exploded against the ceiling. Twilight bumped into the back of the room out of surprise as the bright dust began to fall all around the room. "Hey, this is the same as back at the library," Spike said, standing up on her back and pointing to the dust. Right afterwards, the princess showed up. Twilight was going to say something, but the room itself seemed to begin to visibly warp and deform. She could barely keep track of the configuration when everything changed, turning into what seemed to be a castle. Though not the same castle as the one in Canterlot. "Hast thou heard that Unicorn is coming to the palace? The stories of his talents have spread fast across our lands." The regal voice of Princess Luna was heard, walking with her sister down a hallway in the castle. "He returns to us from his journey. It is said he has bested the Dragon of Apocalypse. We have heard the stories, and if his words be true, then we have many reasons to be grateful to his powerful stallion." The eldest regal sister, Princess Celestia, spoke in turn of her sister. "For he has done what we could not. The Dragon of Apocalypse is a mighty foe, one that would not only otherwise have been bested by our combined unity under the elements of harmony." "That is exactly what we speak of, sister." Luna put her hoof down with more force, stopping in place. Celestia softly turning to look at her younger sibling. "What force can best the elements of harmony? 'Tis possible, I say. There is no such force that can outshine them. I sense treachery and deceit, dear sister." Celestia was quiet for a moment, considering her sister's anger and words. She looked towards the ground before looking back up at her sister. "The feats of heroism are astonishing indeed, but I dare not rule out the possibility that his words are true. Perhaps it was not a force greater than the elements, but something more deceptive. Perhaps he did not best the dragon with power, but with wit." Celestia smiled to try and comfort her sister. "We shall reserve our judgment until we see this stallion with our own two eyes. His presence shall be one of the suspicion and disbelief." Luna raised her head as she walked past her sister. Celestia could only smile and softly shake her head as she followed the younger alicorn. They approached two large majestic doors that with a single grace of their magic opened wide, revealing the spacious throne room. Guards stood at the attention near the throne room chairs as the two sisters took their seats. Their presence was regal and imposing, befitting the rulers of the land. "Guard, fetch for us the unicorn that has come to see us today," Luna decreed to one of the nearby guards. The soldiers saluting before spreading its wings and flying to the opposite end of the throne room, while the regal sisters had come in from the back room. The guard opened the doors to the front where any awaiting guest to speak to the royal sisters would wait. Upon the doors opening, a pony began to make its way forward. Around its body, it wore a dark blue cloak, with a hood that stretched to cover its face. Around his neck was a golden necklace, the center of which sat a blue octagon gemstone. The pony approached the throne, stopping just short and bowing before the princesses. "We welcome thee, brave stallion," Celestia spoke first, settling the regal stone. "Thou may stand and speak with us, and let us see thy face, so that we may know thee better," Luna added, prompting a look from her sister. "But of course, your majesty," the stallion spoke clearly, his voice deep. He stood from his bow and raised a hoof up, pulling the hood off of his cloak back to reveal himself. The unicorn had a blonde, light blue coat with a long mane of gold. A beard began to form just under his chin, and his face looked just freshly turned stallion. He did not look strong, as though he had the body of a youth. Yet his eyes pierced fiercely with an ice blue stare, as if in his short life he had seen and had learned much. "My name is Merlin," Merlin Ambrosius, I have come to the castle of the royal sisters so that I may speak with thee. It is an honor to meet you both. He bowed once more. The feeling is returned for a pony whose name is heard across the land. We are honored to have met thee. Celestia smiled as Merlin came back up from his bow. Yes, thy feats have amazed us all. Tell us, are thy tales true? Has a pony such as thee vanquished the dragon of Apocalypse all by thyself? Luna cut straight to the chase, not wanting to delay the question any longer. It is true, my lady. Acnologia shall no longer be a threat to our lands. Merlin spoke clearly without a moment of hesitation in his voice. The quickness of his reply seemed to astonish Luna. Acnologia? Who, pray tell, is Acnologia? Luna narrowed her eyes at the suspicious unicorn. Oh, pardon my manners. Merlin swept some of the hair out of his face so that he could direct his conversation to her more clearly. Acnologia was the name of the dragon. I discovered it when I came to confront the creature. And how did thou take such a creature? Celestia asked, as curious as her sister. Yes, this is a tale we'd like to hear, Luna added, wanting to hear more of Merlin's words. It is one that I shall share, nor it will take much time. The dragon of Apocalypse, as thou know, was destroying our lands, leaving destruction in its wake. No pony could stop him, and all diplomacy was for naught. He knew to hide and escape from you, the royal sisters, but he feared not the common pony. When he destroyed the village I had visited, I tracked him to the newest home and saw him face to face. Merlin began his tale. And he did not swallow thee or burn thy flesh, Luna puzzled at him, ever skeptical of his tale. He did not, for his curiosity had piqued. He asked what a foolish pony though he could do and wanted to hear my words before I died. So I spoke to him plain and true. I was there to stop his fiendish deeds to save our fair ponies and world alike. And he did not strike thee where thou stood? Luna winced more. Nay, your majesty. Instead, he bellowed with laughter. He raised his hoof and closed his eyes, giving the impression of an aristocrat. He thought it hilarious that a common pony by himself could defeat one such as he. Merlin put his hoof back down and looked back up at the princess. So I told him that I would offer him a challenge. Interested, he asked what it was. I told him that if I could present to him an item he could not destroy, that he would lose his power and be forced to live the rest of his life as but a fair earth pony. Should he break in my item, I would give him all my powers and strengths of a unicorn. What? Luna roared loudly across the chamber halls. If the dragon of Apocalypse acquired the power of unicorns, the world would end in but an instant. Dear sister, calm thyself. Celestia spoke clearly, Luna realizing she acted brash. Let our guest finish his tale. Very well. Luna calmed herself, sitting back down. Tell us the rest of the tale. But of course, your majesty. Merlin adjusted the hair out of his face once more and continued to speak. The dragon was confident, knowing his power could shatter anything within the land. He agreed to my game, and I cast the pact-forming spell to ensure that whoever won our game would give up their bet. This is where I learned the name of the dragon, for one must speak thy true name for the pact to work. He then asked me to present his item. From my cloak. I drew this. Merlin reached into his cloak and pulled out a large black scale. What, pray tell, is that item? Luna asked, not recognizing it. It is the very thing that cannot break. For Acnologia, who has the magical power within him to break anything, cannot break but one thing, the armor of his own hide. Merlin held the scale a little higher to behold. This is a scale from his back. During my travels, I witnessed the dragon several times, studying his true nature. During one of those times, this scale fell from his back. I know not why it fell or how it did so from the impenetrable shell of the best, but why it wasn't in my possession, I challenged him to my game. Merlin put the scale away back in his cloak. So try as he might, With crushing fists, snarling jaws, and fire as hot as magma, he could not break the scale. Then what became of the dragon? Luna asked, demanding to know more. True to the pact, he could not best his own scale. The spell activated and his power was stripped from him, and his body changed to that of an earth pony. With no way to change back, I left him in his cave to wallow in his new form, Merlin smiled, and thus ends the terror of Agnologia, the Dragon of Apocalypse. If thy words are true, then there is much to celebrate, Celestia smiled, amazed at the tale. Once we have confirmed the end of this nightmare upon our land, we must hold a feast in your honor. I would be most honored to be hosted a banquet by you, your majesty. Merlin bowed once more. But I am afraid there is something else of grave importance I've come to speak of thee with. Speak away, my subject. You have earned thy words in this room, Celestia spoke once more. Very well. I shall speak a message first, then I tell you of why I came. Merlin cleared his throat quickly before turning his head, as if looking at either of the royal sisters, but at some pony that wasn't there yet, as though they would be there for him to look at one day. Twilight, Merlin spoke clearly. Thou must find the rest. Memory is the key. The world suddenly twisted and shifted, molding itself back into the simple study room that it once had been. The glowing dust that had fallen from the ceiling faded, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. Twilight and Spike stared in absolute shock at the sight they had just witnessed, at the last words that had been spoken. Twilight, was he talking to you? Spike asked, confused, not sure of what he just saw. I think so, but how is that possible? That wasn't happening right now. It had to happen a long time ago, well before I was even close to being born. Twilight's mind was reeling, her eyes moving around frantically as she tried to gather her thoughts into one place. Was this a magical documentation of events that had occurred? Is this possible to record events like this? And if so, who had placed the specific event in this box? Why would it be made for me to find in the crazy mess? Twilight spoke quickly and bewildered. I don't think it was any of those things. Maybe it was a memory of the past. That Merlin guy did say that memory was the key, Spike said, trying to think about it. A memory? Twilight thought to herself. Then whose memory was it, Spike? I guess it'd be Celestia's memory, or maybe Luna's? They were both present for the event, Spike thought, scratching his head. Well, he said I have to find the rest. I guess that means there must be more memories hiding like this one was. Twilight examined the box, finding the contents now quite empty. With no need for the empty box, she placed it back down onto the table. Hey, your medallion isn't making noise anymore, Spike noticed, trying to listen for any sound. Oh, you're right, Spike. Twilight lifted the medallion with her hoof to look at it, confirming it had gone silent. It must be okay to wander outside again, since it was still buzzing when we got in here. Twilight walked over to look at the door and put her hoof against it. Let's hurry up and find those last two puzzle pieces, Spike, and get into the back room. I have a feeling something very important is back there. How can you tell? Spike asked curiously. Like I said, Spike, whatever is going on is following its own rules. This includes the puzzles, the monsters, and the thing like the memory we just found. Something important is locked inside the back room, or else it wouldn't be locked. Twilight nodded, taking a deep breath and opening the study door once more. The dark library came into view once more, and she realized her pendant had turned itself off in the study room. With a quick tap of her hoof, light returned, and she could see into the dark library. She scanned the area around the door quickly, finding no monsters waiting for them in ambush. It seemed that the creature had simply walked by and left them alone. Twilight quickly pulled the map back out and examined it. Okay, the last two pieces are actually nearby. They're that way, Twilight said, looking to her left, before quietly closing the study room door behind her and following along the wall. She scanned with her light down the aisles of the bookshelves she'd passed, stopping when she saw a light blue book sticking out of one of the nearby shelves. Without moving from the wall, she grasped the book within her magic and levitated it over to herself. The title of the book read, Heaven's Food. She did a quick glance through it, or glanced around to make sure no monster was near, and listened carefully to her medallion before she opened the book and read what it contained. Once there were two sisters, one of whom had no children and was rich, and the other had 5. and one was a widow, and so poor that she had no longer had food enough to satisfy herself and her children. In her need, therefore, she went to her sister and said, "My children and I are suffering the greatest hunger. Thou art rich, give me a mouthful of bread." The very rich sister was as hard as stone, and said, "I myself have nothing in my house," and drove away the poor creature with harsh words. After some time, the husband of the rich sister came home, and was going to cut himself a piece of bread. But when he made the first cut into the loaf, out of flowed red blood, when the woman saw that, she was terrified and told him what had occurred. He hurried away to help the widow and her children, but when he entered her room, he found her bowed. She had her 2 youngest children in her hooves, and the three eldest were lying dead. He offered her food, but she answered, "For earthly food have we no longer any desire. Heaven has already satisfied the hunger for the 3 of us, and it will hearken to the supplications likewise." Scarcely had she uttered these words than the 2 little ones drew their last breath, whereupon her heart broke and she sank down dead. "Can reading wait till later, Twilight? I'd like to finish our business here as quickly as possible," Spike asked, trying to get Twilight's nose out of another book. "Oh, right. Sorry, Spike." Twilight vanished the book in her magic and continued following the wall. Each study door she passed continued to be broken and boarded off. The map showed that the last 2 pieces of the puzzle was in one of the study rooms in the middle of the maze of bookshelves. Twilight's light scanned down the aisles looking for anything that might jump out at her. The pathway ended when she stopped by a large pile of books, but led down into another aisle of the bookshelves. She examined the map and looked at the study door that was next to her. The door wasn't broken or boarded up, looking perfectly good for use. One of the puzzle pieces was contained inside that room. Not wanting to waste any more time, she placed her hoof against the door and pushed it open slightly. Her medallion suddenly began to buzz loudly as the sound of chewing struck her ears. She quickly closed the door and shut, and the buzzing silenced itself. "Oh no!" Twilight took a deep breath, realizing she might have to fight another one of those creatures, and opened the door slightly once more. The medallion began to buzz as she looked through the crack of the door. The room was brightly lit like the others. She could spot a creature in its tentacles easily. It was devouring a pile of books in the corner of the room. The table pushed to the opposite wall for it to have room. She saw the tentacles floating around its back, looking for some prey to stab into. Her eyes moved over to the table, spotting the puzzle piece lying on top of it. She thought about her actions for a moment before having a brilliant deduction. She lit her horn with magic, and the puzzle piece covered the distance with her magic. The creature feasting stopped for a moment, as if noticing her magic. Twilight softly gulped and vanished the piece into her magic before closing the door. The medallion continued to buzz for a moment or two after the door closed, causing Twilight to softly sweat at the idea of having been discovered. However, the buzzing grew quiet and she let out a soft sigh, realizing she'd gotten away with it. "Thank you, Merlin. Your spell has worked miracles today," Twilight thought to herself. She turned around and walked away from the door, heading for the center of the library now. According to the map, the puzzle piece should be right under her nose. At the end of the aisle, she saw it sitting on the floor comfortably, surrounded by 3 separate piles of large books that blocked off any other way to the puzzle piece. It was a dead end in the maze, but in the dead end that hid the final piece. With a smile, she whisked the puzzle piece up with her magic and vanished it into her magic. "All right, we have all the pieces we need, Spike. Let's go open the door." Twilight smiled confidently, ready to go into the back room away from all these monsters. She turned around and made her way back to the wall, planning on following it back to the locked puzzle door and putting the pieces into place. As she began to fall along the wall, she stopped in her tracks when her medallion began to buzz once more. She quickly looked down at the aisle that was next to her, hearing the sound of groaning coming down it. From the shadows appeared another one of those creatures, only it seemed different. Its tentacles were at attention, pointed straight forward. Its head wasn't wobbling back and forth, but instead heading straight forward. It wasn't searching, it knew where its prey was now. The creature let out a screeching wail, charging forward straight at the unprepared unicorn. Twilight leapt forward as the two tentacles came crashing down, breaking into the wall where she had just been standing. She couldn't just stand around right now. She couldn't stop and fight the thing. With Spike on her back and nowhere safe to quickly put him, she had to just run. She felt like she ran faster than she had ever had before, but the world itself had grown in size. And it was all in her mind, she knew, but it felt like the hour would end. She could hear the creature screeching as it pulled the tentacles out of the wall. It was going to head for her once more. Twilight made a sharp turn at the end of the wall. She could hear her breath as her heart began to pound in her ears. One thing was constantly shouting at her head. Spike was in danger. She could feel the baby dragon clinging to her head tightly, looking back at the creature chasing them. She could feel his panicked breath, his terrified claws, his racing heart. Everything about him wanted to be out of danger quickly, and she was the one who had to protect him. She had to get him out of danger. The door came into view, the puzzle pieces still locked into place where she had placed them before. She could hear the crashing of the books and the splintering of wood behind her as the creature thrashed its tentacles out, attempting to drive them straight into her body. "Twilight, hurry!" Spike shouted, gripping hold of her mane. Twilight winced in the pain, but held back her words, summoning the two pieces of the puzzle out from her magic. With the speed and precision, she placed the remaining pieces onto the door, hearing it click with the sound of the puzzle being completed. Her magic gripped the door and forced it open. Twilight sprinted straight for it. The creature wailed as its tentacles missed her by inches, slicing through the air. Twilight turned in the open hallway, seeing the creature flail for the door, its skin flapping around as its mandibles mashed around. With her horn lighting up, she swung her head and slammed the door shut hard, the echo of the slam being heard throughout the library. The medallion didn't let up its buzzing, and Twilight stepped back from the door, still hearing the creature wail behind it. The sound died down for a moment, causing an unnatural calm. Twilight gulped softly, not liking the quiet. The door cracked visibly as something hard was striking against it. Twilight's eyes widened as she realized the door could be damaged by the creature. Another strike hit the door, loudly splitting the wood it was made of. Tentacles burst through the door, heading straight for Twilight. She jumped back and let out a startling scream as it stopped a few feet away from her. The tentacles suddenly began to wither and writhe. A loud, high-pitched screaming sound was coming as if it was suddenly being attacked. Steam started to rise from the entire appendage as it began to wrinkle and shrink. The creature tried to pull the tentacle back out of the door, only for it to fall off mid-pull. The tentacle landed on the ground, curling up before vanishing completely in the steam of smoke that it had produced. Twilight stared in confusion at where the tentacle had been, then up at the door, hearing the creature wail and moan behind it. It wailed and seemed to scratch at the door for a moment or two before giving up and walking away. The buzz on the medallion began to fade as it walked away before finally going silent. "What just happened, Twilight?" Spike asked, confused, though still riding from the terror of having survived a close encounter. "I don't know, Spike," Twilight gulped softly, looking down at the ground. Her light illuminated the spot where the tentacle had been. Then she lifted it up to look down the hallway to see what she might have caused the tentacle to suddenly fall apart. "Hey, what's that?" Twilight asked, walking closer to the door, spotting a strange marking on the ground. She carefully stopped right before illuminating the symbol with her light. "Hey, isn't that the same symbol as the one from the box in the library?" Spike asked, curiously looking at the design. "It is, Spike." Twilight spoke softly, looking over the strange circle design. It was indeed the circles within circles design with the cryptic runic writing. However, it was different. Instead of being a red symbol, this one was blue. "Do you think that this thing being here is what was hurt that monster?" "Maybe. It is the only thing that makes sense, right?" Spike commented, tapping his chin in thought. "Then who put it here?" Twilight pondered as well. The two of them sat there for a minute in thought before Twilight looked back up at the door with a hole in it leading back to the library. "We can contemplate about it more later, Spike. Let's head into the back room and see what we can find," Twilight spoke firmly, turning around and heading down the narrow hallway. Twilight was a little surprised that the back room was at the end of this long, narrow hallway. It seemed unusual for a library to have a useless hallway like within the borders within its borders anyway. But her light fell upon the door at the end of the hallway, the words "back room" written onto it. Quickly approaching it, she put her hoof against the door, braced for what she might be behind it, and pushed it open. The door let out a loud creak as she pushed it open. She winced at the sound, realizing it would likely attract anything that was inside of the room. Though when she looked, she found it to be surprisingly well lit. A few candles were lit around the room, and there appeared to be several tables in the center of the room with a few bookshelves along the back walls. "Oh, hello there!" a voice suddenly came out, causing Twilight to nearly jump out of her skin. "I wasn't expecting to meet another pony here." Suddenly, a unicorn walked into her view from across the room, one she hadn't seen before. His coat was a light brown, while his mane was striped blonde, with darker blonde highlights going through it evenly. On his face was a pair of glasses that showed off his dark blue eyes, while he had a scruffy goatee growing in around his mouth and nose. On his body was a lighter brown sweater with dark brown edges to it, and white collar that popped up from the sweater. But most striking of all was his cutie mark that appeared to be a red magic circle that's with a simple cross square pattern with a large question mark in the middle of it. He closed the book he had been reading and levitated it gently down onto the tables. "I was here doing research on my latest book when these things suddenly started going weird, so I thought I might poke my nose into some other research." The stallion smiled oddly. Twilight wasn't sure how to read his reaction, but she was grateful to see another pony. "Oh, well, I wasn't expecting to see another pony too," Twilight spoke hesitantly, walking into the room and closing the door behind her. "Are you from Stalliongrad? This is the library there, after all." "No, I was born in Canterlot, actually," the stallion said, walking closer. "But I was in Stalliongrad doing research. Tell me, based on your question, this library is no longer in Stalliongrad, so where am I?" "You're in Ponyville," Twilight mentioned, the two stopping a few short of each other. Spike was gripping onto Twilight's head, eyeing the new pony with suspicion. "My name's Twilight Sparkle, and I've been trying to figure out what's going on here." The stallion's face seemed to light up hearing her name before smiling at his odd smile. Twilight couldn't help but think he seemed a little off. "Twilight Sparkle, the one and only? The student of Princess Celestia and current wielder of the element of magic?" he asked, simply fascinated by this information. Twilight went to open her mouth to respond when Spike did it for her. "She's the one and only, all right, but who are you?" Spike asked, pointing a finger accusingly. "Spike! What are you doing?" Twilight glared slothfully at the baby dragon's rudeness. Now, it's all right," the stallion smiled, adjusting his glasses. "I'm certainly not as famous as you would be, Miss Sparkle, but I have started to gain a name for myself. You see, I've published a few books recently in my ever-growing hunger to know more about the world. I love knowing more than finding answers to the questions that the world brings up." He chuckled softly to himself before making sure to look straight into her eyes. "My name is Magus Vince Darkhearts. It's a pleasure to meet you." Spike practically fell off Twilight's back. Twilight's jaw felt like it could have hit the ground. There was a moment of stunned shock, and Twilight took all of the information in. Magus just seemed to chuckle softly at her reaction. "Oh my, I take it you've heard of me?" he asked, amused. "Heard of you?" Twilight could barely contain her voice. "You're the guy who... You practically caused this mess!" Her mind jumped straight to conclusions. "Huh?" Magus asked, confused, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean? I certainly would have nothing to do with what's been going on with this library. I simply have been doing research." "Well, no, you haven't done anything directly," Twilight said, trying to rein in her emotions. "But your spell has caused a lot of indirect problems, and it's helped some good ponies too." Twilight bit her lip as she began to realize what she was saying and how she was reacting. "Start from the beginning, Miss Sparkle. What are you talking about?" Magus asked, a little more confused than he likes to be. "Okay, well, you see, I have these friends who have been having nightmares, so I looked up a book on dreams and found yours. I used the spell you created called the Mind Well on them to find out what was wrong," Twilight quickly explained. "Ah, yes, dreams, a psychological understanding. I remember writing that," Magus mused, rubbing his chin. "And the Mind Well is my personal favorites. A lot of my work went into weaving that spell. I assume it brought your friends' problems to the front and were able to confront them?" "Well, yes and no," Twilight explained, causing Magus to be a little confused again. See, I never saw what their problems were. I saw a floating picture and the spell ended it on its own. But when it was over, my friends said that they had come to understand their problems and were better for it. You don't say, Magus thought once more. That is certainly odd. The spell was never intended to do any of those things. Either of those things. Exactly. So if you're here now, can you tell me why did the spell do that? And what reason would my friends have for not telling me what they experienced while under the mind well? Twilight wanted answers. Magus grew quiet as he thought in silence. It seemed to take a minute or two before he finally responded. I couldn't tell you, Miss Sparkle, was his answer. I didn't intend for the spell to have those effects, and shouldn't seen what their problem was when you cast the spell. He smiled, looking off into the distance. But this intrigues me now. I'd like to find an answer to the question myself. Is this the guy right in the head? Spike asked, a little confused about Magus's words. Spike, no need to be insulting. Twilight huffed a little before turning back. Sorry about asking such questions with the situation we're in. I never expected to run into you of all ponies here. It's alright, Miss Sparkle, Magus nodded slowly. All things must happen for a reason. With the recent phenomenon going in this library, I've been busying myself with researching on it. How can you research something no ponies ever experienced before? Spike asked, a little confused. By finding clues and hints left behind, of course. Magus chuckled softly. Like, for instance, did you know that monsters that have appeared hate something? It brings them pain and suffering to simply even be in the vicinity of it. The blue circle! Twilight gasped in realization. Oh, excellent! You saw that on your way in! Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses again. That's exactly right. I found that symbol adorned in red while I was here researching. Then the monsters suddenly started showing up. I knew it couldn't have been a coincidence. So, using my knowledge of runic symbols, I figured out quickly that changing the color turned the symbol from a positive effect for the creatures to a negative one. He chuckled softly, of course. Of course, the symbol has its limitations. Huh? What do you mean? Twilight asked, a little confused. You see, Miss Sparkle, the symbol runs on a strange system. The monsters hate the symbol in blue, but only the small numbers. The more you create, the weaker the effect becomes. I discovered this when I tried to create a wall to stop their movements. But when they were simply able to walk through it, Magus turned to walk over to the table where his book was laid now. But if I put a single one in the hallway, then the creature feels its maximum effect. So, in short, Magus's horn lit up as he pulled out several different books from the shelves around him and pulled them neatly into a small structure in front of them. You can create a safe room that the monsters won't be able to get inside. I see! That's amazing! You're able to find this all out with a short time researching? Twilight asked, astonished, amazed at his work. Indeed I have, Magus smiled, walking back towards Twilight, and I still have a lot more research to do, so I'm going to be remaining here in this safe room until I have finished it. I see, Twilight softly murmured to herself, thinking things through in her head. She had just found a safe room, a room that would prevent from any kind of monster attack. She couldn't stay there for long. Her friends needed her, and she needed to find the princess. However, there was something that the safe room could do for her. Magus, Twilight spoke suddenly, causing the stallion to tilt his head curiously. I'm going back outside to look for my friends and for Princess Celestia. Are you going to be staying here and studying? But of course! Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses once more, giving the strange grin of his. I love finding answers. I'll be here for a while at it. Good. Then can I please ask you to watch my assistant Spike for me? Twilight pointed to the baby dragon with her hoof. What? Spike said, shocked at the sudden proposal. Twilight, what are you doing? You need me with you. Spike, please. She looked at her assistant before looking at Magus. Would you be willing to do that for me? But of course. Magus smiled his creepy smile. Anything for the wonderful Miss Sparkle. Twilight, no! I want to go with you! Spike cried out, clinging to Twilight's leg. Twilight sighed softly and sat down on the ground, holding Spike close to her. She pressed his head up against her chest so that he could hear her heartbeat. Spike looked up at her worriedly as she smiled down at him. Listen, Spike, it's dangerous out there. Those creatures don't show any mercy. They'll rip you to shreds if they get the chance. Twilight spoke gravely, yet comfortably. I know that, and if you're going out there, that means they're going to come after you, too. I have to be there to protect you, Spike cried out, clinging harder to Twilight. Twilight lifted a hoof and wrapped it around the baby dragon's body, closing her eyes as she hugged him. Spike, listen, I can protect myself. You've seen me do it. I can avoid the monsters and save my life much easier if I don't have to constantly protect you. Twilight opened her eyes and lifted her head. Spike looked up into her eyes as the water started to form at the edge of his. I won't be putting myself into my intentional harm, and I'll stop at anything that plans to hurt me. I won't let those things get to me, Spike, but I do have to go and find the others. Twilight put her hooves on her shoulders and lowered her head to look them level in his eyes. Do you trust me to keep my word, Spike? Twilight asked solemnly. Spike hesitated, not wanting to separate from the lavender unicorn, but her words spoke true. As if he continued to stay with her, he'd be a liability more than he would ever have be an aid. I do, Twilight. Spike wrapped his arms around Twilight's neck. I do trust you, and you better come back for me. I won't forgive you if you die on me. I won't, Spike. I promise you. Twilight hugged the baby dragon close to her. They stayed there for a while, just enjoying each other's embrace. Well, Magus spoke up finally, causing the two of them to slowly break off their hug. If you're going back out there, then maybe this will help you. His horn lit up from a pocket in his sweater, and he pulled out a strange key. Her levitating over to Twilight, who held it out onto her hoof, the key gently falling apart. I found that back here, but I have no use for it since I'll be researching. Perhaps you'll find a use for it out there. Thank you, Magus. Twilight nodded her head, vanishing the key into her magic. Thank you for everything. Don't mention it. Magus flashed his creepy smile before turning to head back for his books. Twilight stood up and headed back for the door to the library. You're going to come back for me. You got that, Spike said, giving Twilight a soft glare out of fear and worry. I do. Twilight smiled back at the baby dragon. The two looked at each other for a long period of time before Twilight opened the door to the back room and exited, leaving her number one assistant behind.